which is Frank LItalien.
I had a quick question, Nicholas.
Okay.
I was just curious to know, like, is it homeostasis? Is it something scientists or like astronauts when they travel, like they freeze themselves for 100 years in the future? Like, what was the idea? How did you started this project, like building an operating system like this? What was the quick story? I'm just curious to learn.
I'm sorry, Marufa, but we need to hold on to the times of the presentations. So you can contact Briar directly and ask him. That's fine.
Sure. Okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good presentation. Interesting.
Thank you.
So Frank LItalien, he will talk about the Arkseed protocol and ARKxSTEP assets inventory. And he is the chief designer of Pure Nature Agro Solutions and working with AI farming and a lot of 3D printing and self-similar pieces that can be put together. And you can fill in if I missed something, Frank. And
Absolutely.
The floor is yours.
I mean, this is going to be a two-part presentation. Just warning you up front, so to avoid the whiplash. The first part will be a novel approach to settling the moon using lunar lava tubes. And the second part of the presentation will go into details about these little module thingies that I developed, and I'll be able to hand out if you guys have 3D printers and are interested into experimenting with them yourself. So here we go. The Arkseed protocol, a daring approach to rapid lunar settlement. These are the references. So it's basically every way to contact us. Disclaimer. This project presupposes a coordinated international effort to industrialize and settle the moon. Communication, power, storage, and generation are requirements that overlap with adjacent projects. Those assets are leveraged to create enclosures and habitats that favor economic expansion. It could not exist in a vacuum, figuratively speaking. So it's part of like this economic thing where like you take some and you offer some and you find a way to like complement other actors' needs. So basically, this thing would not be possible without Starship or New Glenn because we're going to want to use like very large fairing size in order to send to low Earth orbit and then to the lunar surface inflatable modules, kind of like the Sierra Life habitat that's been developed. These are essentially like 50 feet in diameter if you scale it up to Starship, which is tremendously helpful because coincidentally, it's approximately the same size as these lunar lava tubes. And these provide a lot of advantages compared to like traditional tin can solutions for settlement because, as you know, like it's very expensive to get stuff up there in terms of delta V. So if you could somehow like find a way to only ship like one wall to your building and like the rest of it is like already like pre-located at the destination, that's a really good way to save money in terms of sending stuff up there. And we have to be able sooner or later to use like local resources in order to stay there as planned with the Artemis Accord. And these things are pretty neat because there's a constant temperature of near minus 25 degrees Celsius in the lava tube's interior. So you avoid a lot of problems associated with thermal swing that you get on the surface. And we have no idea how big these are. Like we've done a scan of one of them, I think, but you know, it's still very much terra incognita, and I really like the whole mystery and adventure aspect of it all. So some of the key technologies required for this to happen are going to be AI swarm robotics, because we're going to be using a lot of robots to prepare the terrain, inflatable modules, like I mentioned, and origami tessellations. I don't know if you guys are familiar with these types of things. It's essentially like meta surfaces that have like mechanical properties that can be exploited for deployment of structures. It's been done with solar panels, and it could be done with larger inflatable structures akin to airbags, but you know, larger scale, different geometry. And oh yeah, this whole project also is going to require like molten regolith electrolysis, of course, and sodium-based batteries from my current architecture. Obviously, we could import lithium, but if I can do it locally, that's probably the best approach. and a lot of our proprietary technologies, such as the bioreactors for reclamation, homeostasis engine that Bayer just discussed, and the structural mesh and biomesh, which me and Stuart will be going further into the details later on. So this is a little bit complicated in terms of like setting the whole thing up. Basically, you want to do some survey first and foremost, and then you prepare the site. Afterwards, you deploy the plug and you pressurize and activate the interior. And then from that point on, you can expand the structure by digging further into the ground. So I was thinking the low-hanging fruit in terms of surveying would probably be done through something akin to the Nova hoppers that sadly didn't make it to the surface in one piece with the Intuitive Machine 2 landers. These would be using radar and X-ray to make sure that the sites are devoid of faults that could be aggravated by pressurization. As I mentioned, we're using solar panels to power the whole thing, and the batteries are using local elements preferably to last throughout the lunar night. I'm not a big fan of relying on modular reactors. Nuclear is not something that we can scale easily, so doing it the hard way. I'm going into the details a little bit about the fleet of robots that I thought of using. The main robot would be the Chipperbot, which is a unholy abomination made of a jackhammer, some spot robot legs, and some microspine grippers developed by JPL for landing on comets. I could go further into the details, but just I'm gonna try to make it quick. And you got Sinterbots that are gonna melt the surface to prepare landing pads and other surfaces that require like hardening and dust mitigation. Dozer bots, these are like small bulldozers developed for this case by Off-World Industries. They move regolith and build all sorts of ramps and excavation. And of course, humans are important in the loop. So we got to be able to like repair those robots, and also they'll. I'm sort of assuming like a baseline of human presence for some time before the kickstart of this project into like higher gears, because if we are to use like biological processes on the moon, we want to have a certain stockpile of like carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, which are somewhat like not found in huge quantities on the moon. So I was thinking of importing those with the astronauts. I'm using a star-shaped type of geometry for the seals of the plug. Basically, you got the traditional module with like two annihilations that allow trapping of a polymer between the flaps. This way you can you can create a partition between the outside and the inside that will resist creep and pressure differentials. I also added some anchoring so that you could secure the inflatable module in a more reliable way. The blue and red picture that you see is the airbag geometry. Red is like laying flat and blue is once expanded. There's all sorts of softwares nowadays that can anticipate deformation and make complicated structures that are easily to pack for shipping to the orbit. So the phase 3 of the mission is the deployment of the plug. So basically you deorbit the inflatable module via lander. You use a big rover to move it to the cave entrance. And once it's there, you anchor it into the walls and deploy the skirts and shoot the polymers between the flaps to create a seal. An important shell of this whole project is the plastic biosynthesis from locally available resources. Essentially, like once the tube is pressurized, there might be some cracks and some sealant that might be required for complete airtightness of the structure. So I'd be using processes developed by Daniel Tompkins. It's essentially a self-expanding carbon loop using blocks of algae to transform available nutrients into bioplastics and other helpful substances. So yeah, essentially I'm relying on the astronauts imports for making this the biological aspects of this project into a reality. So basically we'd be kickstarting a greenhouse under the surface on the moon in the lava tube using aforementioned resources. We'd be using electric heaters and imported lamps. Sadly, I could not find a way to like generate light that would be conducive to photosynthesis using local elements without going into super high tech, like diode doping and all that. But you know, we'll do with whatever's available until we can find something better. So here comes a really interesting part: the building of the arcology. Once you get a sealed environment under the lunar surface with constant temperature, access to light and power, you could start building inside it so that you could increase the biomass to a scale that is conducive to larger habitation. So basically, we'd be using some of Stewart's cuboctahedric nodes for making floors, and my own systems to make a biomesh that can help plants grow in very like tight spaces. Essentially, you could have crops all the way up to the ceiling, which could help with the limited space. And then you got another trophic level with shrimps, tilapia, which will help with the general morale of the population. I suspect there's a lot of crops that will be very valuable up there for morale purposes, extrapolated on the Antarctica research stations. Good food is essential for good living. The interior layout doesn't have to be linear. It could have all sorts of pockets that are some pressurized, heated, lighted, others not. I suspect robotics will play a huge role for a very long time on the moon until we can maybe get a mice driver to ship some carbon from Mars to the lunar surface. Either that or like picking it up from Ceres. That's the two main alternatives to importation. And once the arcology is settled, robots and astronauts dig deeper, and the excavated regolith can be either cast or compressed into bricks that can be helpful for developing the surface of the moon. And like I mentioned, crops are going to be very valuable for the local economy too. And one thing that you can do with the bricks is laying them into a Roman arch like this thing. Basically, with minimal power requirements, you could form very large structures on the surface that will be radiation shielded. Could be helpful for other partners. That's pretty much it for this part. If you have any questions, please keep them for later. I'll be reviewing the ARKxSTEP asset inventory now. So for this part, I'll be referring to these modules. I got several different types of geometries with pictures. Basically, this project stemmed from the desire to make 3D printed assets that are valuable, because intrinsically, it's very hard to 3D print something that is going to make the cost of the machine worthwhile for the everyman. It's great for engineering parts and people who have access to CADing softwares, but essentially, like making 3D printed assets that can allow you to like make food or like treat water, that's a million times more valuable than anything you could get from engineering if you're in the sort of place where you need to eat and drink. So these are a few examples of structures that could be made with these modules. It's a high-density agriculture system that can be made with any FDM 3D printer. So we're not talking about different types of material. This is strictly using PLA. The geometry of the grow bed is entirely customizable. You can make very large basins. I'm really fond of like the spiral columns personally. I think these might offer some structural applications also, especially once the roots start growing and replace the geometry on a long enough time scale. These are derived from two basic geometries: the truncated octahedron, which is like an octahedron, but you cut off the tips, and this way you end up with square faces, and these can fill volume with no space in between. And there's another geometry that has been recently discovered in the epithelium called the scutoid. So it's basically a mix of between a prism and an anti-prism. One side has a hexagonal face, the other side has a pentagonal face, and four of them like cluster together like the shape that I incorporated in this slide in the corner here. The interpreted geometry is right below. These form surfaces that could be used for a variety of applications. I've been thinking like whipple shielding might be helpful too, but essentially it's great for growing food on the walls or ceiling. The world is your oyster. So these are the two systems interacting with each other. You could make structures that are an amalgamation of surfaces and volume. The four base modules. You got this little guy here. This one there. This one here. And these fit very neatly. As you can see, these are tied together with zip ties. So it's 100% plastic. You can make it pretty easily on Mars, but it's not too much of a stretch to do it on the moon too. Yeah, one thing that's really interesting with these modules is that the connectors on the square faces, they got two ridges. The inner one and the outer one. The inner one is exactly half the size and half the distance from the center of the face than the larger ones, which means that like if you scale them like 2 to 1, these are intercompatible infinitely. So like you could keep scaling these up, and these will be cross compatible with all other previous modules that you make with smaller machines. Yeah, there's a central column in all of them. I'm going to try to align it so that, yeah, the light doesn't lend itself very well to that exercise. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So it drains easily through like the central channel, which can also be used to have a bunch of like wires or tubings or like structural rods coursing through them. It's very adaptable. Also got some face terminators. So you got ones for like making legs and others for like opening. It might be easier if I just show you guys. Give me a sec. If you would squeeze me. Right. These are columns I put together. Right. And as you can see, there's a little bit of dirt sticking out. That's one of the open face terminators. There's also closed ones. And there's little plants growing in there too. And there's little features here. The white bits that you can see are meant to allow air to circulate and water too, but trapping the soil inside the column. So here's a few assembly examples. Like I mentioned, I'm a big fan of the spiral columns, but I'll be exploring other geometries as soon as I got enough modules to experiment. Oh, I also have other assets that are good for a desertification mitigation. Wow, that was a mouthful. Basically, it's derived off the GrowOasis water box device that uses capillarity to wick plants with water in such a way that it does not evaporate, and you could reduce the consumption of water by a factor of 7, which is very impressive. When I learned about this, I had to make a knockoff. These could be used with Salix viminalis to make structural components like walls and domes, and keeping the water consumption at a minimal. And that's pretty much it. You guys have any questions?
Thank you. And yeah, any questions on either of the presentations, I should say?
You reminded me of a toy.
Yeah. Oh, I used to remember the name of these. Yeah, these were really cool. They were explored by Buckminster Fuller to make shelters for disaster relief areas. I'll probably remember it as soon as the presentation is over.
Yeah, this doesn't come with The labeling has all been lost decades ago, but
That's a Hohmann sphere, right?
pardon me?
I think the name of it is a Hohmann sphere.
Oh,
There are different variants of it with different expansion ratios associated with the same.
Damn, everybody has one.
The no, this is Gary Barnhart, Frank. I very much enjoyed your presentation, and I think you'll see that it's complementary to the one that I'll be giving. One of the things that was not entirely apparent from the collapsing of your model into 2D there is there's this notion of the kissing number, which is how how many surfaces can be in contact with a central surface, and have your and it's akin to this notion of closest packing of spheres. But with respect to the 3D structures that you're looking at, what constitutes the number of the multifaceted structures that you can fit around a central core? Did you figure that out?
In terms of like how many of those modules can be fitted around this central one?
It's not a dodecahedron. I forget what you called it. Okay, but the combination of the squares and octagons, if you will. What is the scale that it has to be at that would enable you to totally surround one of your central figures with like-sized figures. In some cases, in order to make that work, you have to alter the dimensions and have have a central object that's one size, and then you have to have interstitial elements.
Yeah, that's I'll have a wonderful book that I ought to share with you sometime later. It's called Structures in Nature is a Strategy for Design by Peter Pierce. It has been hugely inspirational for this project. Basically, if you start using multiple different scales of these modules together, you're going to end up with like interstitial space, like you mentioned. One thing that I really enjoyed with working with twice as large and twice as small in terms of packing is that like two smaller modules are the same length as one large one. So as much as there be like space between the two types for the tessellation, you can still mesh it with the rest of the assembly without having to adjust smaller distances like you see sometimes with pentagonal based geometries like the dodecahedron and all that. Since it's derived off the cube and octahedron, these are very easily to tessellate compared to alternatives like you mentioned.
Yeah, because that's one of the key things with respect to this is you need to find a tessellation pattern that makes sense, not just in in a planar sense, but also in 3 dimensions.
I think
you might use the chat to put the name of that book in, and then everybody would have access to your information.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Frida.
There we go, chat.
Do we have any other question here? We have still a few minutes.
Yes, I have a kind of a question about the lava tube. So, yeah, one of the things that strikes me, maybe it's more of a comment. One of the benefits of the lava tube is that you can start with a relatively small one, and then over time you can mine as you can dig out bigger and bigger spaces as you're able to import more and more organic material, for instance, to the moon. Is that progression something that you've modeled, Frank?
Well, obviously, like carbon, nitrogen, and organic compounds are going to be a huge bottleneck. I suspect that like the parallel development of both Mars and the Moon will have like complementary, they will be complementarily beneficial, as in like you could have carbon from Mars be shipped to the Moon, and this way that you wouldn't have to like bring it up from Earth. Obviously, this is good. This one specific aspect is a major drawback to this approach for the Moon specifically versus Mars.
Well, but I was thinking of it like for the lava tube, if you can start small in the tube. In fact, maybe you could have two plugs, one at each end, and then you start with a small space internally, and then as you're able to import more and more carbon, nitrogen, then you can expand the settlement by moving the plugs.
Oh, I did not think of like moving the plugs, because if I were to use like epoxy seals for like bracing against the surface, it might be prohibitive to undo it. I guess you could keep adding plugs as you go further along, but I was thinking excavation might be the easiest way to expand the habitat.
Yeah. Okay. So, but either way, it's a nice growing kind of a concept, because you can start small, and then you can excavate more space as you import more carbon and nitrogen, or you can move the plug. Either way.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, Frank, one of the things that we were confronted with is, how do you remove the necessity of the, shall we say, the miracle from when you arrive there to where you have a space that you can have a minimum habitat functioning. It's, once you've gone, the notion of your plug presumes that you understand that the space, can be contained and pressurized, or do you have some provisions that enable you to effectively live and work there while you're figuring out how to pressurize the space?
Yeah, I'm not seeing this whole thing as a first settlement for the Moon. I suspect that the astronauts will be living in like traditional tin cans for a while before they transition into like larger environments with bio-derived life support systems. This is obviously a long-term project. It's probably not the best way to like kickstart the Moon settlement, but it's a great way to expand it.
A quick comment on your minus 25 degrees. That's probably equatorial. I guess it's rather colder nearer to the poles.
Probably. I'm not aware of like lava tubes on the polar region, so that might be another hurdle for the realization of this project, is that it's locally based. You can't. You're kind of like stuck with building inside lava tubes if you want to like make this happen. But with the equipment, we're still talking about like excavation inside the tube, so it could be done elsewhere without a tube. It's just it would take more energy, and I think it's something that would be done later down the road.
Well, I suspect that before people are placed on the Moon for long term, there's going to be an awful lot of material that's going to have been deposited on the Moon, so that these raw materials will be there.
Yep, I'm counting on that. I don't think people will bring back their organic waste. These are not the Apollo days.
I'll talk about that tomorrow.
Plan for not.
We're going to recycle it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Looking forward to your side of the talk.
Yep. Thank you, Frank. And